The Biden administration has requested another $24 billion for Ukraine. Makes sense. Throw more money into the fire of corruption. $24 billion. I mean, this is on top of the already approved military budget and the already approved congressional budget for Ukraine, on top of all of the money that's going there that we don't even know about.
Right. I mean, given that the U.S. credit rating has been downgraded by just one analyst firm, but still that,
Moody's.
that was, it's big, right? Because just like the rest of us, when you apply for a loan, you realize the income is too low and the debts are too high.
Right.
Does this seem like a good time to then go do something like that?
No, and the reason that Moody's downgraded specifically was debt, the national debt of the United States, the unsustainable national debt of the United States. But just forget the debt for a second. Just drive around any American street right now and go into any American major city, and it looks like zombie town. Strung out, drug addicts, laying on the side of the street. It doesn't matter if you're in Oakland. It doesn't matter if you're in Philadelphia, San Francisco, drive through the streets of New Jersey. It doesn't matter. It's all over the United States right now. And we can send $24 billion to Ukraine. And these politicians who are running for president, like Marianne Williamson, Jimmy Dore had her on last night. And like she's like, no, it doesn't matter. Like the support for Ukraine has nothing to do with the drug addicted streets of the United States and the lack and the amount of homelessness on America's streets. Like they can totally compartmentalize this stuff. It's unbelievable how they can keep these things separated.
Right.
Well, what I want to see then is put your money where your mouth is. If it doesn't matter, then spend that money on U.S. cities as well.
Right, exactly.
And then let's see what happens.
Because we know, we've reported this, the idea of homelessness and homelessness and poverty in the United States could be eliminated with like what, $20 billion? I think the number is like 21 billion could eradicate poverty in the United States.
Well, that's very hypothetical because, as Michael Schellenberger points out in his book, San Francisco, is that there is a homeless industrial complex. And so a lot of times when a city does throw money at this problem, they'll put it in disparate places. So it's not, in fact, that the police will enforce certain things like pooping on the street or repeat drug offenses or parole violations. And it's not just that there's homeless shelters, and it's not just that there are drug rehabilitation centers. Those three things operate separate of one another and are not motivated to help each other. So for that reason, there's so much money and so much incentive to not solve the homeless industrial complex that we're not even close, because politicians just choose one. Like, oh, I believe in body autonomy. That means a person should be able to shoot themselves up and poop on the street and sleep in a tent and hang over like a zombie during the day. That's body autonomy. So I will put my money into, drug centers that will give them sort of, I forget what it's called. Now there's a term for it where you regularly give them safer drugs, right? Or, oh no, I think people should have houses. So I'm going to put my money then in these countertops, marble countertop homes in LA for homeless people, even though the studies show that when homeless people are put, and drug addicted homeless people are put in those home shelters, they die at the same rate. They just die inside. In fact, faster, because they can do drugs inside rather than outside. So there's a lot of money there. So it's not just like, where's the money? It's like, we're not motivated to solve it in any kind of holistic way. There is some money going there, but it's mostly making people wealthy who are not homeless.
Well, yeah. So I guess then just give the money to Ukraine then. We don't need it here in the United States because I guess money is not the answer. I guess infrastructure, actually jobs, creating a healthy environment, education in the United States, maybe not, throwing money at homelessness is not the answer, but actually creating an environment of safety in the United States and education and manufacturing and incentivizing businesses to do business and building roads that actually work and railways that actually transport things to and from the back and forth of the West Coast, East Coast at a high speed instead of the 1800s speed at which the U.S. rail system works now. So all of that to say that, yes, we're doubling down and giving more money to Ukraine. So, and Western media is now waking up shockingly over the past 48 hours. The Western media is now waking up to the fact that Ukraine's counteroffensive that started on June 4th was not a counteroffensive at all, but in fact a total failure, sent tens of thousands of Ukrainians to their death. Let's put it another way. NATO just sent tens of thousands of Ukrainian men to their deaths, and they know it, and they're purposefully doing it in Ukraine. Even CNN and pro-Ukraine reporter Jim Sciutto, who is a propagandist and a mouthpiece of the intelligence community, is being forced to admit the truth of the Ukraine situation. Watch how, reluctantly he's admitting the truth here. Watch.
Long before Russian forces invaded, it was understood they outnumbered and outgunned Ukrainian forces. So when Ukrainian troops managed early on to roll back a good deal of that invasion force, hopes were initially high they could quickly finish the job. It's not worked out that way. And now, new reporting tonight that there's growing concern among Western allies about Ukraine's counteroffensive and its fate. In a moment, we'll talk to a retired three-star general for his take. But first, the exclusive reporting from CNN's Jim Sciutto, who joins us now. So what are you hearing from your sources about what they believe Ukraine's prospects are right now?
A markedly negative turn, Anderson, and these are sources I've been speaking to since the start of the counteroffensive, but even going back to the start of the war. And expectations of this counteroffensive were quite high, going back just a few weeks ago. But in recent weeks, as Ukrainian forces have encountered really intense Russian defenses in the east and the south, three lines of defensive lines, defensive belts as they're known, with trenches, as you're seeing there, tens of thousands of mines, Ukrainian forces have not proven able to break through those lines. They've encountered staggering losses, I'm told, both in terms of killed in action and wounded in action. And Ukrainian commanders, in response to that, understandably have pulled back some of those units to save some of those casualties. And while even a few weeks ago the hope was that over time they'd be able to break through, more recently the assessments both on this side of the Atlantic but also in Europe have been that they don't quite see the opportunity. So that hope has faded. Not entirely faded, but it has certainly become a much less hopeful outlook for their prospects for success in gaining back significant territory.
Yeah.
Way to catch up.
Yeah, way to catch up. It's like forced to admit now the propaganda has run its course. We were hopeful a few weeks ago. The sources that I was talking to since the beginning of this war, the sources were hopeful. No, they weren't hopeful at all. They knew that this is exactly how it would go. They were just spinning you a line of garbage that you would take to CNN to try to, force more money into the military-industrial complex and throw these men as cannon fodder. They don't give a shit about the Ukrainian people. They don't give a shit about these people at all. NATO doesn't care about the Ukrainian people at all. Get your heads out of your asses. Here's a captured Ukrainian intelligence officer who was part of the counteroffensive. He admitted yesterday that they had no plan at all. And the mission was simply to throw as many men as possible to their deaths. This is a Ukrainian commander. Watch.
Вам говорили, какие задачи?
Такого не рассказывали. Сказали, что надо перерезать дорогу куда-то, а куда? Вот я к нашему батальону.
Ты же разведчик, ты командир отделения. Все равно должен же понимать какой-то примерно, хотя бы свою задачу.
Нам такого вообще не доводили. У нас разведка вот наша именно. Она на бумаге в основном.
Ощущение, как контрнаступ, как он развивается? Вы начали 4 июня его.
Если за месяц контрнаступа этого 4 километра, или сколько там, 5, так это не контрнаступ, это я не знаю что. И положить столько народа. Разговаривали, что прием тупо в лоб, эти батальоны посылают, как на убой.
Как парни на это реагируют?
Не ахти, все понимают, что наша бригада вроде бы как приманка или как.
Потери большие у вас?
Большие. Насколько я знаю, про первая рота, первый мехбат, 31-й механизированный батальон, 31-й механизированной бригады. Там потери большие. До 120 человек, что я знаю. В строю оставалось 21 вместе с командиром.
Можно сказать, что контрнаступ, он провалился?
Можно и так сказать. Хотя я даже не знаю, где мы сейчас, где наши войска. Нам об этом вообще не говорят.
So we had no plan. They know they're throwing these people right into the meat grinder, and they are wildly untrained. And this is exactly what they want. They lose an entire brigades, entire mechanized brigades, just people just gone, destroyed, wiped out. The New York Times finally sent a reporter. Congratulations. Let's give it up to the New York Times. They sent a reporter to Ukraine. Can you imagine that? What's it like actually sending a reporter to the front lines to find out what's going on in this war? You mean not relying on what the Zelensky government tells you? You actually doing your own reporting? Now, you'll recall a number of months ago here on this very show, we showed you where CNN admitted they publicly admitted that reporters on the Ukrainian side are being kept away from the front lines. You'll recall this, right? This was a CNN report. CNN reporter then says, but we got exclusive access. The government allowed us to go to the front lines. Remember. And they like sort of teamed up with the tank brigade or whatever, mechanized brigade. And so they did like a sort of a propaganda piece, CNN did. But they admitted publicly that, no, you are not allowed to go to the front lines to report what's going on the Ukrainian side. They don't want you to see what's actually happening there. So the New York Times just sent a reporter and managed to get frontline access thanks to the Ukrainian government. And here's what the New York Times found in this big piece. Here's their headline. It's not a sprint. Ukraine's Marines insist it's a marathon. That's their headline. Journalists from the Times spent 2 weeks with troops from the brigades trained and supplied by NATO forces to get their I love this. We spent 2 weeks here. That's all we got. We got to go back to New York City. We can only do 2 weeks. That's it. We got to go back. So let's just kind of go through this New York Times piece here. Some brigades suffered heavy losses in the initial stages of the summer's counteroffensive. At least one new brigade was so badly debilitated from casualties that it was withdrawn from the battlefield to rebuild. They've received 4 to 6 weeks of training in combined arms combat. Just 4 to 6 weeks. As you know, Colonel Douglas McGregor talks about, that is unbelievably.
That's less than boot camp.
Yeah, that's an awful.
Yeah, don't they generally give kids more driving education to drive cars?
Right. 4 to 6 weeks. Most of the fighting has been hidden from the view of the news media. Oh, really? The New York Times is admitting that. Most of it's been hidden. But reporters from the New York Times were permitted to visit several Marine brigades, 2 of them newly formed brigades that are operating on one or part of the Southern Front to hear from the troops for the first time. So these are newly formed brigades being decimated, according to the New York Times, who spent 2 weeks there and who were finally granted permission to go. The new brigades are made up of fresh recruits, fresh from basic training after their.
That's one way to put it.
Yeah.
Stolen
fresh.
off the streets is another.
Yeah. Fresh. This is fresh meat coming in here. Really, really disgusting. Among the people.
In the same way roadkill is fresh meat to eat.
Right. That's exactly what this is. And as we reported here yesterday, we showed you the awful videos, or we didn't show you the videos, we told you about it. You can seek it out online if you want to, how these Ukrainian soldiers are sitting in trenches next to the bodies of their decomposing comrades who were killed weeks ago, days and weeks ago. And to look at those videos is it looks like photos from the Civil War, seeing these bloated corpses sitting next to they're sitting there smoking cigarettes, sitting next to, that's what's happening in these trenches. And NATO knows it, and NATO is throwing more money into it and wants these people to die. There's no other way around it. They know exactly what's happening.
I want to point out, too, that you shouldn't, if you have people that are calling in and volunteering, you shouldn't have to throw grenades in their bunkers to get them to fight.
Right. Which is what you're referring to. A few weeks ago, we showed video of a Ukrainian commander who there was members deserting and didn't want to fight and pulled a grenade out and threw it right into the trench. That's how you get them to fight or kill them. So the New York Times went through a couple of other key points here. Some Ukrainian brigades suffered heavy losses during the counteroffensive. At least one new brigade was so exhausted by losses that it was withdrawn from the battlefield to rebuild. New brigades of the armed forces of Ukraine are assembled from recruits who have just completed basic training, according to the New York Times. Ukrainian commanders are pushing recruits into battle and using untested units to launch a counteroffensive. They've never worked together before. They don't know how to run these drills. They don't know how to run actual campaigns. They don't know any of this. The New York Times also learned that Ukrainian soldiers are complaining about the lack of training received in NATO countries, as well as the fact, by the way, so think about this New York Times piece and CNN sort of simultaneously rolling out these pieces about the lack of training, the utter destruction of the Ukrainian military, staggering losses. That was the word from CNN, staggering losses. The New York Times saying all of these people are green. They don't have the training. They are being slaughtered. What do you guys make of this? What do you guys make of these sort of simultaneous media outlets of the New York Times and CNN, which are mouthpieces of the Biden administration and the Pentagon, rolling out these types of propaganda pieces sort of almost simultaneously, 24 hours apart? I'm just asking. What do you guys think?
I kind of feel that this is setting up for the U.S. to say, we did everything right, NATO did everything right, Ukraine just failed. Because the thing is, I see one of three things happening. That NATO planned this all along. They knew this would happen and they didn't care, which I think is the most likely. Russia did something major that was some sort of surprise that then they hadn't anticipated, which I haven't heard anything about that. Or the NATO leadership behind all this is completely incompetent. Which one of those things are they going to admit to? None of them. And so the only thing they can do is blame Ukraine.
Right.
And I think that's what they're setting them up for.
I think that there's been plenty of breadcrumbs to tell us that Western leaders wanted this war with Russia in Ukraine for a very specific reason. I think what's so interesting, though, is that they can spin all this and newly formed troops or, counteroffensive that would take their land back. They never show you the map. They never show you what's at stake. They never show you what the counteroffensive was supposed to look like. We show you this map all the time. In fact, can you pull it up on your?
I'm trying.
Oh, sorry. We try really hard to make sure that you have a sense of what is at stake and what they're trying to do for the counteroffensive. Because if in your head, I was talking to a relative lately and they're like, well, just all of Ukraine's being bombed. I'm like, no, only one part of it is at war and has been for a decade. And that's the contested part. And the counteroffensive was to regain that part, right? And so can we pull this map up? This is what the counteroffensive was supposed to do, was take all of that area red, that's red now, in Russian control, and turn it back to this sort of eggshell color in the center. Regain it for Ukraine. That is area that does not want to be Ukraine, that voted to be part of Russia, that has asked Russia to come and save them from the bombing since 2014, the shelling of civilians. You're throwing lives after lives, right? Now that Russia is there, at the very least, these people feel safer and not being terrorized by the SBU. What those blue dots are there are Ukrainian offensive. And so that's showing you actually where Ukrainians are launching their counteroffensive. The black are areas of heavy conflict. I can't remember off the top of my head what the yellow is. But the counteroffensive, they're saying what that guy just said, only got 4 to 5 kilometers. That's it. So all of those lives, all of that NATO money, how much more? $24 billion more. And there's no way, no matter how much is spent there, that border is going to be pushed back. And if you root for that, then you're rooting for, there's a bug. Then you're rooting for the people who live there to be in Ukrainian territory and be terrorized again by the SBU. And so it's a really hard conflict, right? And we need to have a sense of it, not just trust that CNN is like there and the war is everywhere. It makes it too esoteric that you can't wrap your head around if you don't really know what's at stake. And I find it so irresponsible that we never get to see maps in that way. And so that's one of the reasons as we cover this war that I'm so committed to just seeing what's there so we don't talk about it like ignorant a-holes.
One of the other things the New York Times points out is that they are criticizing, Ukrainians have been criticizing the American Max Pro armored vehicles that they've been receiving, which are designed to fight insurgents in Afghanistan on camels. They cannot wait. Well, they're designed to fight insurgents. And in the wars that the United States has been fighting over the past 20 years, which is against, guys on camels in the desert, basically, not real armies. Not anyone with air power, not a real army like the Chinese or the Russians, literally guys on camels. And these American Max Pro armored vehicles cannot even withstand the firepower from the Russian army. They're being destroyed. So more Bradleys are showing up. American Humvees are supposed to be arriving in the next few weeks. Many of them won't even arrive until the fall. One Ukrainian commander told the New York Times, quote, "I've lost many, and some of the newcomers are mentally broken." That's the status of the war right now. So the Biden administration doubling down, wanting to send $24 additional billion into the meat grinder so all of Ukraine can be totally destroyed. NATO wants Ukraine totally destroyed, and it wants this entire generation of men wiped out so they can do their bidding. I mean, just BlackRock can swoop in and buy up and take up as much of the land as possible and turn it into some sort of aircraft carrier for NATO operations in the future. I don't know. If you know what their plan is, let us know in the chat below. But it's absolutely disgusting that the Biden administration continues to push this. And Congress will go along with it. Don't look for anyone really to push back on it. Maybe Rand Paul, but in the end, he'll vote for it because it seems like that's what they end up doing. And then this...
Definitely not the progressives that you thought were peacemongers like Bernie Sanders.
Justin Amash won't. Just saying.
Maybe the only one. Like, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe the only one. We'll see. We'll see how many other brave souls come forward and say enough is enough. No more of this craziness. I know Matt Gaetz, but I don't know if he'll vote for it. Who knows? Maybe MTG. We'll see. We'll see.
All right. Well, let's take note.
Yeah. Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.